evening, good evening. What a good-looking crowd. What a great crowd. Good evening, Treasure Coast fans of history and the Sexton family contribution to Indian River County. If you need an assisted listening device, would you please raise your hand and one of the ushers will give it to you now. If you need an assisted listening device. Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Emerson Center. My name is Paul Amaru. I'm one of dozens of people who volunteer to make events like this possible. I hope you saw our PowerPoint presentation for our next program. Historical actor Ursula Knox Odom, who will appear in character as legendary educator Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, one of the founders of the Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach. We certainly appreciate this wonderful turnout to enjoy a wonderful, informative discussion by the Sexton family and their recollections of Patriarch Waldo. Our Fair Trade Corner, which sells fair trade coffee and other items from all over the world, will be open after the program. Please note that emergency exits are behind you through the same doors you entered. Restrooms are to my right outside the auditorium. This is a no smoking and no vaping facility. Contrary to past requirements, you can photograph or record the program without a flash, okay? Please silence your electronic devices. If you did get a survey this evening, on the reverse side of that survey, please take time to answer it as they help us identify areas where we can improve, as well as determine additional topics of community interest, and you can go online to submit the survey. The Emerson Center is pleased to host these free community events. Tonight's program is solely sponsored by Marine Bank and Trust, our premier community bank. Please join me in a round of applause for the generosity of Marine Bank. However, that does not cover all the costs. After the program, ushers will be passing the basket. A tisket, a tasket, we're going to pass the basket. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation and wish to see shows such as this continue, a donation would be very much appreciated. To tell you more about tonight's wonderful program, I introduce Bill Penny, Chairman of Marine Bank and Trust.
Good evening, everybody. If you've ever walked into the Ocean Grill and asked about the marvelous mind that conceived and assembled that eclectic building, you've heard of Waldo Sexton. And if you drifted into the Driftwood Inn just to the south, you saw another example of Waldo's work. On the mainland, when you visited McKee Botanical Gardens, or the Szechuan Palace, or the Patio Restaurant, each time you saw the Sexton touch. Around here, those in the know the name Waldo Sexton, but how much do they know about the man, Waldo Sexton? Tonight, we've assembled a team of Waldo's fondest admirers, his descendants. They will share their up-close perspectives on Vero's iconic legend. As a bonus, we'll also discover how Waldo's family continues to enrich our community's quality of life through art, agriculture, real estate, and historic preservation. Our moderator tonight is Gregory Inns, publisher of Indian River Magazine and coordinator of this weekend's Treasure Coast History Festival. I'll ask Gregory to introduce our panel members. Ladies and gentlemen, Gregory Inns.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Sextons. Yep. Welcome to the opening of this year's Treasure Coast History Festival, presented by Indian River Magazine. I'm Gregory Inns, the publisher of Indian River Magazine. We started the festival last year with an all-day Saturday festival in Fort Pierce to mark our 10th year as a magazine serving Indian River, St. Lucie, and Martin counties. And this year we are proud to expand the festival to Vero Beach with tonight's presentation. Thank you to our sponsors, Center State Bank, Southern Eagle Distributing, East Coast Lumber, the Sunrise Theater, and the Emerson Center. Thanks especially to Emerson Center Director Amy Gallo, Earl Beasley, and the many volunteers here who are making tonight's presentation possible. I got to know Amy and Earl through our work producing their annual program for the Emerson Center. If you see the Emerson Center program, we produce that. Sorry about that. Okay. Yes, here it is. Thank you, Chris. If you're familiar with this wonderful place, you know that it's named after the American poet, essayist, and philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson. By coincidence, the subject of our presentation tonight, Waldo Emerson Sexton, was named for Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I believe also that many of the people, you remember Ralph Sexton was Ralph Emerson Sexton, Sean? Ralph Waldo Sexton. Thank you. A little bit about our interest in history. Shortly after my business partner and associate publisher, Alan Osteen, and I published our first issues of Indian River Magazine, we soon found that the history stories we were featuring were really connecting with readers. Newcomers told us the stories helped them learn about their new community, and old-timers thanked us for refreshing their memories. So I hope as you leave tonight, you'll pick up a card on the outside. We're offering a free subscription to everybody in the audience tonight, kind of like the Oprah show. Everybody goes home with a card. One of our most popular set of stories appeared in our earliest issues when we explored the wonderful world of Waldo Sexton. We featured all of his masterpieces, McKee Botanical Garden, the Driftwood Patio, and Ocean Grill, and learned of another lesser-known work, the Szechuan Palace. Best of all, one of our writers, Willie Miller, told us that Waldo's original home place was still standing as well and was being lovingly cared for by Waldo's grandson, Mark Tripson, and Mark's wife, Hildy. Mark and Hildy opened their doors to us and opened the doors of further discovery of the Sexton family's many accomplishments. In subsequent issues over the years, we shared stories on Natalie's Orchid Island Juice Company, founded by Mary Grace Sexton and her husband, Bobby, a grandson of Waldo Sexton. We explored life at Treasure Hammock Ranch with Sharon and Sean Sexton, another of Waldo's grandsons, and we revisited masterpieces Ocean Grill, Driftwood, and Patio several times. These stories led our writer, Christina Taskin, who's with us tonight, to come up with another story explaining the Sexton family structure and relationships in their various entrepreneurial endeavors. You can find that story reprinted in the Emerson Center program, available free here and produced by Indian River Magazine. To set the stage for our discussion tonight, I want to give you a brief background about Waldo Sexton's life before coming to Vero in 1914, or was it 1913? Waldo Emerson Sexton was born March 23, 1885 in Shelby County, Indiana, the youngest son of 5 children to Sarah Ann and Isaac Sexton, a farmer. The first male from his township to attend high school, he later entered in Indiana University to study medicine, but soon transferred to Purdue University, where he studied animal husbandry. To make money for college, he sold cooking utensils and also collected commissions from the salespeople working under him. Very smart. He graduated in 1911 and moved to Barberton, Ohio, where he worked as manager of the farms of O.C. Barber, known as the Diamond Match King. Waldo lived in Barber's antique field mansion, and it was undoubtedly under Barber that he learned to appreciate antiques and the finer things in life. Despite increasing production on the farm, and improving the quality of livestock, including producing a record milk-producing Guernsey, Waldo was lured back to sales and began representing the Spalding deep tilling machine. In other words, a plow. A prospective sale to the Indian River Farm Company to demonstrate the plow brought Waldo to Vero Beach in 1914, or was it 1913? Here to settle these and other Waldo questions is our panel. But before we introduce them, I'm just going through this over the years and most recently the last couple of weeks to try to explain it to you. I'm just going to give one more thing on background because it's going to be important for you guys as we go through the night. And it'll be a lot easier to understand everything. So it's Waldo and his wife, who was Elizabeth, had 4 children: Jacqueline, Barbara, Ralph, and Randy. All are now deceased. But on our panel tonight, I'm proud to say that we have representatives from each of those 4 families. Might also be helpful to remember, as tonight's presentation goes along, the primary interests of the 4 families. Waldo's younger daughter, Barbara, married John Tripson, and Tripson purchased Waldo's Vero Beach dairy and created the well-known Tripson dairies. Waldo's oldest son, Ralph, purchased Waldo's Treasure Hammock Ranch and took over Waldo's beef cattle business. Waldo's youngest son, Charles R. Randy Sexton Sr., took over much of Waldo's citrus interests. Waldo's oldest daughter, Jacqueline Daly, married an Episcopal priest, and they lived in California. So you might say that while 3 of the kids were doing Waldo's work, and the 4th one was doing the Lord's work. Okay, that's it for the primer. So here's our panel. Immediately next to me, Bart Tripson is the grandson of Waldo Sexton and son of Waldo's daughter, Barbara, a University of Florida graduate. He is president of Sexton Inc. and several other Sexton corporations. He describes himself as a part-time cowboy and as a full-time raconteur, and you'll find that out tonight. Next to him is his wife of 43 years, Hildy Tripson, who brings a special perspective to us tonight. She's the past president of the Indian River County Historical Society. Hildy was also close to Waldo's widow, Elizabeth. Hildy worked at the Driftwood for several years, and she cared for Elizabeth. And then you'll learn about this later on, but Elizabeth and Barbara lived next door to each other. It's a wonderful story. And Hildy also was living there too, yes. And so she got to know Elizabeth quite well. Next is Jens Tripson, also a son of Waldo, and he's Mark's brother. Jens worked at the Tripson Dairies and later with the palm nurseries that his father ran after the dairies. He is a stained glass artist, and some of his work appears in the Driftwood and the patio. Bonnie Schwab. Bonnie's the California cousin. She is Waldo's granddaughter and the daughter of Waldo's daughter, Jacqueline. Bonnie spent most of her childhood in Belmont, California, but would travel to Vero Beach by station wagon every few summers with her family. Bonnie now lives in Vero Beach, we're glad to say. And next to Bonnie is Sean Sexton, who many of you know, a Waldo grandson and son of Ralph Sexton. Sean is a trustee of Treasure Hammock Ranch. He's a cattleman, artist, and writer. And as he puts it, his life has been a headlong collision between art and agriculture. He received an individual artist fellowship from the state of Florida in 2001 and became the inaugural poet laureate of Indian River County in 2016. Next, we have Randy Sexton, son of Charles R. Randy Sexton, Waldo's youngest son. Randy is president of Sexton Groves and owner of Sexton Palms. I'd like to start the discussion tonight with anything I missed with Waldo's years before arriving at Vero Beach. Mark, is there anything you want to add? I'm sure there is. Also, give us a sense of the state of American agriculture when Waldo arrived here, and tell us what Vero Beach might have been like then.
All right, I'm Mark Tripson. My mother was Barbara, Waldo's second daughter. And I tell you what, it would do him proud to see all y'all come to see him or hear about him. And we, as a family, we appreciate it. You know, as families go, a lot of times you get, everybody stays mad at each other or something. I'm sure y'all's family never does that, but anyway, he would love this, because I would say he was a little bit braggadocious at times, so this would give him a real platform to carry on. Hopefully we'll do the same. But I wrote some stuff. I hope y'all can hear me. I have a barroom whisper. You ought to be able to hear me without the microphone. But I want to tell you, I've always heard everything 6 degrees of separation. And I didn't quite understand what that meant for a long time, but Waldo's ancestors came across the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone about 1760 and stayed 50, 60 years in Kentucky. And then when they opened up Indiana, they moved over there because it's better farmland. Kentucky's hard place to make a living. But 250 years later, my wife and I go up there to eastern Kentucky and buy a farm. And the farm's around the corner from Big Sexton Creek. And there's a little town down the way called Talbot, who was Waldo's cousins. And then where we paid the electric bill at the house, up there is the town called McKee. And then at the bottom of the bridge on Big Sexton Creek, there's a ode to Old Joe Clark. And Old Joe Clark was Ralph's young friend from high school on that was from Maryland, and what he was doing over in Kentucky, I don't know, 200 years before. But so that's what happened when we went up there and found all this. Came back, and Big Randy was alive then, and he told me, yeah, all that was true. They stayed there and went on to Indiana and stayed there. Waldo stayed till he left. Came down here. Now here's something else. He said he came in 1914. In my attic, which I bought his house, the Indian River Farms put out a newspaper. And there in the fall of 1913 was Waldo making a crop of cowpeas. And it's a form of like black-eyed peas. And then in my house in the library, I found the abstract. And in the abstract, it tells everything about your property. And there, lo and behold, he bought it in 1912. And then over in a garage that fell down, I found on his gravestone, he said he was born in 1885 and died in 1967. But the one I found was something, he had a guy that, when arc welding came in, he had all kinds of people make arc stuff, and they made him it wouldn't be a gravestone, a grave marker out of welded metal, and it gave his birth as 1883, and his death it had a question mark. So I'm just, nobody's around that remembers if any of this is true, but this is what I hear, so I'm gonna call it true. Excuse me. But he did come here in we'll say 1914, that's a good start.
Mark, yes.
Pardon?
Let me show you something. Okay, so this is in the Indian River County Main Library. I think Ralph gave those.
Yeah.
But Waldo, that's the photo of Waldo with the plow, Right. And apparently, I don't know if that's his handwriting, but he says it's me. And then he says there.
Well, you've heard the story. He'd much rather be a liar than a bore. But excuse me. But he was driven to be successful. And his mother loaned him $500 when he came down here, and he put it on land. At that time, you could put $5 on a piece of property and pay him so much for the rest of your life, and different weird things like that. But in 1924, his accountant, they had an office over on 14th by the theater, and he ran him down and said, Waldo, I just figured out you're a millionaire. And Waldo said, look, don't tell anybody. I've got to go to the bank and borrow the money to make payroll. So, and that's basically the story of his life. It was rags to riches all the time.
Mark, can we go back to 1914 when he arrived, and he did the plow demonstration. What happened when he was doing the demonstration?
Oh, it didn't work.
Yeah. Why didn't it work?
I think you can see that's an eight ox team trying to pull it, and it couldn't pull it fast enough to turn the dirt. And it broke down on top of that, and Vero Beach at that point was about 2.5 weeks from everywhere, waiting on parts to come out of Ohio. He started selling land for the Indian River Farms, Mr. Zai and a group out of Davenport, Iowa.
But with the $500,
Pardon?
With the $500 that he had when he was here, what did he pretty much immediately do with that?
I didn't understand that.
Okay, so he had $500.
Yeah, borrowed $500 from his mother, and that was his start here.
Right, and he purchased 100 feet of oceanfront with it, according to the...
He always said that, and I'm not sure where he bought, because I'll get to that story.
Okay.
Unless he sold it. You know, I mean, he was buying and selling all the time, because when the boom was here, they had a boom from 14 to the end of World War I, and it died until about 21, and it boomed again to 24, 25, and died until World War II. But, so he was always moving, buying and selling and doing what he could
do. Right, I
do.
just want to kind of give the audience an idea, but when he arrived here, he pretty much very soon purchased oceanfront property and the homestead on 12th Street, 160 acres.
He did all that. Florida was booming. It was the golden age of agriculture, and they'd take people on trains and bring them down and show them everything. They had test farms and talk them into buying 10s and 20s. And look in the Indian River County historical book, and it talks all about that, how they brought them in and what they showed them. Old Eli Walker had a 10-acre grapefruit grove in 1915. He sold his grapefruit, which is Duncan's. Nobody will eat a Duncan because it's full of seeds, but it's the best eaten. He sold the whole crop on 10 acres for $7,700. Well, $7,700 in 1915, you could buy a Ford automobile for $200. So, I mean, that was big money. And it was warm all year round, basically, except for a few cold fronts. So, I'd hate to be a farmer. I went to Illinois one time in dead of winter. I don't know why anybody would live up there at all.
The other thing that he did was, and this is close to you because you live in the house now, but he started construction of a little home.
Yeah, he lived in a... To begin with, he lived in a little tin shack with dirt floor over due north of where we was, in the middle of basically Sugar Mill 1, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then when he was getting married, his Elizabeth said, I ain't living that dump. So he had built a 3-room house no running water. Well, they did have running water because the flowing wells gave you water pressure. You get good 25-pound water pressure. So, but he built an open air porch. I don't know if y'all ever go outside on a hot summer night, but some of those mosquitoes are bigger than the puppies that the neighbors have, you know. So it didn't take him long. She told him again, go get me some screens and windows and close this place up. But it was just 3 rooms, and as they got kids, they added on. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but they added a second story on top of single story. And 80 years later, in the porch, the ceiling's sagging. I said, oh crap, the termites have eaten all this lighter wood up. We're gonna have to fix it. We took the ceiling out, and they had they had 2x6 lighter rafters, just a 12-foot board across, every 6 foot. And what was sagging, the weight of the roof had cracked 2 of them. So, me and another carpenter, I'm not a carpenter, but we jacked it up and reinforced it, put the ceiling back in, and it's still doing fine.
But let me ask Sean, he had a great story the other day. How did Waldo and Elsbeth meet?
Is this on? Okay. As I understand it, she was, it should be, Hildy might talk about it a little bit too, but the movie theater in town, at that time, there was no soundtrack, and you would read the script, you know, on the frames after the action, and then of course there was a musical soundtrack going on, and Elsbeth was there playing Hearts and Flowers and Johnny Get Your Gun. She only knew 2 songs on the piano, according to whichever was appropriate for the moment, for the scene. And her father had come down for his health. He'd come to Vero Beach, and that might even seem a little mysterious, but I think it didn't agree with him necessarily, and he decided to head back to Illinois. But she said, I'm not going anywhere. The place was full of young men, and she saw opportunity. I want to read you something really interesting. It's in a letter that Waldo wrote. And he said, first I will say I came from a place 8 miles from a dirt road in Indiana. That puts you in the country, I believe. I graduated from Purdue, worked my way through school. After I had paid off my college obligations, I accumulated $500. I had it changed into silver dollars and went home, arriving about 1 o'clock in the morning. I hired a liveryman to drive me out in the country. My father and I got down on our hands and knees in the center of the floor, and in light from an oil lamp, we counted the money. My father said I was rich because I had $500 and didn't owe anybody. This money in front of us looked as though it covered a 40-acre piece of ground. I put this money in the bank and came to Florida. I came directly to Vero Beach, bought 120 acres of land, a business lot, and 100 acres of oceanfront, making down payments on all of it. And I have been in debt ever since.
That's great. And briefly, he went into the citrus business. He realized what potential the citrus business had, and by I think 1917, he had 10,000 trees planted. And he also was the first person, according to this book, Tales of Waldo, everybody knows it, but the first person to test the qualities of Indian River citrus and how advantageous it was to grow citrus here. And so he was already in citrus, And then he started the Vero Beach Dairy in what year? 1924? Okay. So he was already starting all these various interests. He had the real estate going, he had the citrus going, he was also a realtor, he was selling big developments and so forth. Jens.
Some of us from the family companies were rewriting the bylaws from the Oslo Packing Corporation from 1921. Waldo had a list of industries that he would, that when the articles of incorporation went to the state would allow him to engage in these different endeavors. And they were steamship lines, rail lines, trucking companies, refrigeration companies, electric companies, gas companies, anything he needed to get agricultural products grown out of the field and to the consumer. And I mean, the list goes on for pages. They didn't, he did a lot of things, but he didn't ever have a rail company. Mr. Flagler took care of that. To me, it was just amazing the vision that he had that early of what could be done here. And it really proved to me that, he wanted to do everything he could, and he did a lot.
Thank you. And one of the things he also started was the development that is now Vero Beach Country Club, and that was during the land boom of the 1920s. And it didn't go off so well, did it?
Right. That's one of my stories I was going to tell you. He and Mr. McKee started the Royal Park subdivision, I guess they called it. And they had the 9 holes golf course, and put in 9 more later on. But back then, income tax was paid by the wealthy. Mr. McKee was the wealthy. And it was 3%. So they were selling land, those lots. They had 1,000 lots to sell, and they sold like 400 of them right quick. But there again, it was a little bit down and catch me when you can type sale. So McKee told Waldo at the end of 24, he said, look, my income tax is gonna kill me this year. Y'all quit selling land. Just don't sell any more lots till I tell you. Well, the boom busted, and they didn't sell any more till about 1944, 45. So 3% looked pretty cheap by then. And it's the country club's still going. It's owned by the members. And I think they just added some more holes to it or something. I'm not a golfer, so I don't know. But yeah, I mean, we've had a bust in about 2005 till the last couple of years, but it still wasn't as bad as it was back in the Depression. Waldo was a genius at trying to keep the land and figure out how to pay the taxes. So when my mother got married, he gave her 100 feet of beachfront up where the Vero Beach Inn, I call it the Ramada Inn. It started out as Ramada Inn. That's where it was. And the reason he did that was so he didn't have to pay the taxes. And there wasn't anything on it. I mean, down the way, we have 500 feet of beachfront, and there wasn't any, he bought it in 1935, and they did not get 1 penny out of it till 72. That's a long time to tote something, even though the taxes weren't, if you said it real quick, they weren't a lot back then, but you better say it real quick.
Going back to the 20s, so we had this big land boom, everybody's doing kind of well, and then in 1926, 28.
Yeah, the hurricanes that hit South Florida were devastating. People left here in droves. And same deal, it was a big boom, and they were going crazy over buying and selling land. And if you sold at the right time, you made a fortune. If you were smart, you took your money up front, didn't give them any, offer them any finance.
And there was an anecdote about, a lot of people were killed in Okeechobee in the 28 hurricane, just to kind of show you Waldo's generosity.
Yeah.
He had some of his cows that were injured.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a 28 or not. I think there was one in 33.
Okay, what happened?
They had a barn there by the dairy, and the barn blew over, and it killed the cows in it and the mules. They were still using mules. And they butchered the cows. I don't know what they did with the mules. They may have butchered them too and hauled them off. People were hungry, you know. But they had a cool, when I was a kid, it was still there, and they used it for the dairy. When they delivered milk, the trucks weren't refrigerated. But he had like a 10 by 10 box that was a snow machine. You took a shovel in there, you had snow, so they covered all the beef up with the snow and drove it to Okeechobee. And maybe somebody here would remember, but in 34, 35, I think to get to Okeechobee, you had to drive down to Indiantown and go across. I don't know when they put in Road 60. David, do you know? They put in Road 60?
It was in the 30s.
The 30s?
Yeah.
It may have been going then, I don't know, but I remember going to Okeechobee in the 50s, and it was a trek. Now you can get there in an hour and a half, but it seemed like it took us a half a day to go over there.
So Sean, you also had a good anecdote the other day about Waldo in his reaction when he saw a run on the bank at Farmers Bank in downtown Vero Beach.
Oh yeah, he was standing downtown with Major Clarkson. It was the crash, I believe, and the Farmers Bank was there it was on 14th, right? Is that correct?
Same place it is. Furniture store there now.
By the furniture store, and so they're standing there talking. This is a story my dad told me 100 times. And every time he told it to me, he'd say, "Did I ever tell you the story about the time?" I'd say, "No, no, you never have." It was always great to hear him tell his story, and I'm sure Waldo started him out with stories, because Waldo was a great storyteller too. You could almost hear his voice through him, and it was that way. They handed that down. But there was a raucous crowd standing outside the bank and getting ready for a run, and Major Clarkson said, "Waldo, it's getting a little rowdy down there. I think we better go down there and see if we can't bring things under control." And Waldo said, "Well, you know, I don't know, maybe things need to take their own course." And Major Clarkson said, "Every penny I have is in that bank." And Waldo said, "I owe them."
Okay, so we've got Florida in the boom, and then Florida's undergoing a bust. Okay, so you've got all these big mansions in Florida, and especially in Palm Beach, you know, some Addison Meisner mansions and so forth. And they're starting to tear them down. They can't pay the taxes, they can't pay the mortgages, and Waldo's got all these established businesses going, and what happens? Jens, Hildy, Bonnie, Randy?
About,
Shopping trips.
oh, well,
Palm Beach.
it was a little before my time. I think it was actually, some of it was a little before, Mark would have been a baby. Blow it. Oh, there we go. Okay, when I was at probably 6 maybe, I remember them, people coming with trucks of stuff and unloading it in the yard. And we had a black fellow that started working for, well, he worked for my dad, but he worked for Waldo too. And he talked about, my whole life, about the trucks. And that when Waldo had one of these deliveries, and he would get a big piece of wrought iron or a piece of marble or something, And he would say, you guys unload that and put it right there. And then as the day went on, he said, no, I'd like you to move it over there. And keep going. These things were heavy. They weighed hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It would take 6 men to move some of them. And he said, well, no, move it back over here. And he said, at the end of the day, Waldo would have him put it exactly where he had him put it the very first thing in the morning. But when I looked over here a few minutes ago, there was a slide of the line of Royal Palms, and I assumed that was at the Key, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, it's the cathedral.
But Waldo planted the Royal Palms that were on Royal Palm Boulevard, and he bought them, or the story goes, that a man came up with a truckload of Royal Palms and was selling them very cheap, and so Waldo bought them and started planting them the next day, and then it turned out that a truckload of palms had been dug out of the ground and stolen from Lake Worth, or Worth Avenue, Miami, actually, yeah. Yeah, there you go, okay. So you know, we don't know how we got all this stuff, we just know we got it.
I'm going to list some of Waldo's masterpieces and the dates of their completion or opening. Tell me what you know about them and share some of your own personal memories there. Again, I know a lot of you weren't there, but you've heard the stories. And the other thing is I wanted to mention tonight was that Mark's talking more than other people, it's because he knew Waldo. He's the oldest here tonight, and he actually knew Waldo where the other kids were younger, and Waldo was sick the last 6 or 7 years of his life. So, you know, that what they know with the family is more from what they know from their relatives. So I'm going to mention the first one, McKee Jungle Gardens, 1932. Who wants, you know, do you guys remember, what do you guys remember about McKee Jungle Gardens?
You know, I always thought it was started that it opened the day after the stock market crashed in '29. That was my story.
It's possible, but the dates I'm using.
Time was irrelevant back then.
The dates are, right.
But it was I tell you, 100,000 cars a year went down US 1 going to Miami and south. And Waldo was a genius about figuring out if he could stop part of them and sell them something. And if you look all through the United States, there was all kinds of attractions all over the place. And so McKee's was an attraction. He had at the front of what's now the patio, there was a fruit stand and a real estate office. So you could sell them land while they were drinking juice. And tell you something sporty, in the 80s, when the cell phones were coming out, people with money were buying cell towers, and you could make a lot of money if you bought the right tower from the right guy. Well, in the 20s, Waldo didn't have cell phones, but they had pay phones. And he owned all the pay phones in Vero Beach. And I don't know if they were a nickel a phone call. I remember when they were a dime. And he split the money with Bell South 50-50. So I always thought, you know, now that's slick. I remember in the patio when it was going, he had a pay phone in the kitchen. He got tired of it.
But back to McKee, he virtually had animals there. And,
he wanted an attraction. Mr. McKee was into growing orchids, and they had orchids. He had beautiful orchids from all over the world. And Waldo brought in monkeys and bears and parrots, alligators. I'll tell you a funny story about an elephant. They wintered circuses there a few years. And that way when people were going south, they'd put on a show, I guess. And they had an elephant there named Dennis the Menace. And he got out. They couldn't find him. And Waldo went to high school and got all the boys to come out of school, which they loved. Took them a couple of days to find Dennis. Yeah, and they finally found them, but one of the men that worked for my father at the dairy was going to Fort Pierce to deliver milk. The only way to go to Fort Pierce at that point was drive down US 1. And he said about 4 o'clock in the morning by McKee's, there's an elephant standing in the road. And back in those days, if you drank a lot, they'd say you saw the pink elephant. So he didn't tell anybody for 2 or 3 days he'd seen the elephant because he wasn't sure. But they found Dennis over in the middle of the river taking a bath. And that was Dennis. There was Queenie, who he had introduced people at the ocean, at the driftwood, but they're 2 different elephants.
But back to McKee, he had opened it as a campground, and didn't he also have some Seminole Indians living there for a while?
Yeah, for the attraction, he got Lewis Tucker and his family to come over and build a little Seminole village so that people could see an Indian. I mean, you know, you always heard about Indians in the 20s, but nobody saw them. And,
Yeah.
But he was a real showman.
Yeah. No, anything to get a dime out of people when they stopped. That's what you were looking at, was dimes.
Gregory, I realized researching for the giant table, the board at McKee, Jens and I went to St. Louis to the Historical Society, the Missouri Historical Society, to find out about as much as we could about the giant board, and we found out quite a bit. But one of the things that we discovered, they had this Philippine compound, and it was right at the moment that it had become a protectorate or a territory of the United States. And so this was during the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition. Waldo was 19. Everybody in the probably for 1,000 miles around came to that exposition. It was just the first World's Fair, or if it wasn't the first, it was the precursor of the World's Fair. And one of the things they had all of these different Philippine natives, different tribes, different groups come and build their particular kind of house and set up their kind of village. And they imported some of the materials for the houses and villages that they built, but they also gathered some from the landscape. And another interesting thing, they literally lived there in the Philippine compound, and it made me think that maybe Waldo wanted the Seminoles to come to McKee, and it was kind of a mimicking that whole thing that he had seen at the exposition. A great story about all of that. In St. Louis, they had quite a population of dogs running around, and that was the principal food animal of the Philippine islands among the natives. And the dogs just started disappearing in St. Louis, and it was not an unusual thing for you to step up to the fellow there cooking on the grill, and be offered a plate of dog when you were attending the Philippine exposition. But he found that giant board there and fell in love with it, and he thought that it was the grandest thing that he'd ever seen, and he kept track of it for 40 years, and one day he was able to buy it and bring it here and set it up and immediately built the Hall of Giants to house it. And I call it a lifelong love story, really.
It's really amazing. If you get a chance to go to the Indian River County Library, where the Sexton family has donated a lot of photos, if you go upstairs to the genealogical department, it's locked. I mean, it's not locked, but it looks like it's off to the public, but it's not, and you can go in there and ask to see the Sexton family collection, and you'll just see these wonderful photos. We were able to get 10 of them. They let us, the library let us use 10 of them for tonight's presentation. But it really shows Waldo was a very robust man. Just looking at all these photos, and you can see these guys. You know, a lot of hard work, and you just see him working with these guys. Big pieces of lumber, the biggest tree stump, ever recorded, I think. But Randy, any memories of McKee or the Driftwood 33 and 34?
Not for me. I was much younger than the rest of the group. So anyway, but our family is on the citrus side, so I know a little bit about that. But we grew up across the street from where Mark is now, my grandfather's house, and that was a family homestead with the citrus there. So I always had an interest in that. My dad took over that part of the business, after college and after working for John Tripson for a couple of years before he went in to work for Waldo. So the citrus thing was good. It has been good for years and years until really the 2004 hurricanes, and that spread citrus greening. There's actually believed that it started being spread in 1995 when Hurricane Andrew came in through Homestead and brought it from Cuba. But we didn't know what it was as an industry, and it got here and took over before we knew what it was, and it was too late. And unlike other countries, our citrus is, if you go from Homestead to Daytona, there's not a mile that there's not citrus planted in there somewhere up and down the coast and through the state, so it can spread very easily. So with that came the demise of our business as an industry. It's still here. I don't know if there's any, I see an ex-citrus grower sitting in the front row, but I don't know if there's any citrus growers here, but they are having a tough time. And it's just gone downhill terribly. I got out 2 years ago. So, and I always had palm trees on the side, and I attribute that to McKee Jungle Gardens and that type of stuff. So, and we sell palms. Anybody needs one? So that's how we make a living. So, but anyway, that's most of my memory. One of the Waldo and through my dad to us through the stories always promoted hard work, and I know this family's all been a part of that, and felt a sincere responsibility to keep things going and work hard at it. And one of the things my dad told me when I got out of college in 1979, I bought out his partner, which was a family cousin, one of Waldo's cousin's sons, is that they never missed a payroll since Waldo came to town. You heard Mark mention borrowing the money, but till the time I closed the business 2 years ago, we never missed a payroll in 80 or 90 years, whatever it was. Very important. So, there are many times that we borrowed money to make it, but we did it. So, but anyway, so I think they gave us good values and hard work, and haven't paid off, but we're still here.
So, we're skipping around a little bit, but while we're on the subject of the citrus, do you think what impresses me about the family is that, I don't know if Waldo channeled it or it happened by happenstance, but he got at least one family member to get involved in each of his interests. For example, on the dairies with his Vero Beach dairy, the Tripson, John Tripson, his son-in-law, purchased the Vero Beach dairy from him and developed Tripson Dairy. Randy's dad took over Waldo's citrus interest and ran those. Sean's dad, Ralph, took over the beef cattle and ran that. And poor Bonnie's folks out in California. But
Kept us in touch with God.
they prayed for it, yes. But do you, and Bonnie's got some great stories, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But do you think he that Waldo did that on purpose, or was it just by happenstance? It was things that they naturally were interested in, or what?
I think it was just things they were interested in. Randy got a degree in agriculture, Randy Sr., as did Randy Jr. My father came from Texas. He went to Mississippi State, and he had a degree in agriculture. And so I think it just kind of fit that they Waldo had the opportunity. He had the groves, he had the dairy, he had the ranch land. Sean's dad had his degree in agriculture. That was the primary industry here. Tourism was part of it, but they were growing cows and growing oranges and grapefruit and shipping them all over the country and all over the world. So it was just, he started all these things and everybody picked up on it. And so the opportunity was still thriving.
Right. He also, but when did he get out of McKee Jungle Gardens? In the late 30s or early 40s? Sold
When did what? When did it close?
When did Waldo, did he sell out his interest to Arthur McKee?
Yeah, McKee.
Yeah.
McKee wanted to retire. They were both in their 60s. Y'all need me to talk with this?
Yes.
It's a big room.
I figured with my barroom whisper, you could hear me all the way around. But they wanted to retire. Waldo was 60, I guess it'd be 60 in 1945. McKee was 10 years older, more or less. And so he said, okay, I tell you what, you take the garden, or McKee wanted the gardens. And he gave him, Waldo took part of McKee's portion of what they called Oslo Hammock, which was a grove next to it where Vista Royale was. And then McKee couldn't stand not, he said, Waldo, I can't stand not being in partners with you on something. So Waldo said, okay, I'll give you a third of this 500 feet of ocean front. There again, McKee had to pay a third of the taxes. And his heirs did until it finally started producing money. And that's, I don't know what else they were into. I don't know the splits on the golf course and all that. Or the lots, there was a lot of lots. And but that's what happened. And then Mr. McKee's first wife died, and he remarried. And we're still in partnership with the second wife's children. And so I don't know if, well, there's still some of McKee's grandkids, MK and those girls here, the Lattas.
I think most of them are on MK's here.
MK's here.
Let's, we'll move to the Driftwood, if you guys would share your memories or knowledge of the Driftwood. It was originally built as just a family getaway.
Yeah, supposedly.
That was the story my mother told was that Waldo built it as a weekend cottage for them to go to. And the original was just a breezeway building. And for the 4 kids to have their own rooms, and Waldo and Elizabeth would have their own room. There's in the big room across the top of the kitchen. And the story that I grew up with, and I think all of us did, was somebody asked to rent a room the first night. And the Corrigans, who are a fairly old Vero family as well, so it converted from a weekend family thing to a hotel almost overnight.
Okay, so just for the record, I need somebody to tell the story of I know we made reference to it earlier, but I want somebody to tell it in detail the story of a woman going through the morning tour. And who would like to tell that story? Sean?
About the...
I think Martin should tell the story.
Oh, okay, yeah. He was... When they were tearing down all that stuff in Palm Beach, he'd go down there and get it. They'd give it to him. Or he'd pay the, what do you call it, the salvage guy's money and bring it up here. Otis, who worked for him, told me one time that more stuff blew off the back of the trucks coming home than ever got here. But there's a guy in Palm Beach that we have fun with it. He can tell you where every piece came from, which estate, which I think school at 50, 60 years later, they know. Playa de la Renta was belonged to the John Deeres or somebody and all that stuff. Well, anyway, he had it all tacked up there. Woman, he was giving tours one day, which he liked to do. and was telling about this and that and this and that. And the next day, a woman came back on the tour again, and he was telling about this and that, and, you know, and she said, Mr. Sexton, yesterday you said such and such about that piece. He said, madam, I would much rather be a liar than a bore any day. But the stuff is, it's cool stuff, but you gotta have a place to put it. And that's the whole secret. He had built the driftwood, added on, built ocean grill, put stuff in there, built the patio, put all stuff in there.
But as I understand it, he got all this stuff, but he wasn't really a hoarder. He put it to
No, he wanted
active
it,
use.
he thought it was beautiful. And it really was when you look at it. You know, those rich people down there, I mean, most of them that he was getting, when the older generation died, the young kids, those houses were big, but the rooms were like a 10 by 12 bedroom was a big bedroom. So they tore them down and built a modern. They're doing it right now. I got this guy that I know down there says the hedge fund guys are coming in, buying a $20 million estate, bulldozing it, and building an $80 million estate. So it's still going on, the same process. Problem is, with all the new stuff, it's drywall, and it's hard to make drywall look pretty once you do it.
Greg,
Yes.
regarding all that stuff, Waldo, when he was finishing up at Purdue, O.C. Barber, the Diamond Match King you mentioned, wanted to start a world-class dairy. And he went to Purdue, he put word out that he wanted to hire their brightest and best. And that just happened to be Waldo Sexton. And so he put him in charge of his dairy. I think he partly developed the dairy as well as ran what was there. Is that correct, Mark? Do you know?
You know, I think the dairy was there, and he just gave it the oomph.
He just gave it the oomph. And he produced a world champion milk cow named Spotswood Daisy Pearl. And he stayed in the mansion, Mr. Barber's mansion. And he said that he learned the finer things of life from the butler. The butler educated him on etiquette and table manners and the whole thing. And he said later, staying in that place, he said, I just had to get some of that robber baron stuff. That's when he fell in love with stuff.
Can you describe Waldo's architectural and decorative approach? What materials did he favor?
What was here? I mean, wood. They're out west of town in the swamps. There were lighter trees. They cut them down, used them for logs, or if they had a sawmill strong enough, they cut them boards. There was cypress over in mills around Holy Paw, and probably Whittier and Kenansville. And one thing, the sawmills use steam, and they use the sawdust to power the saws. And the Pecky cypress, because nobody wanted it, they used it to fire the mills. And he'd go over there and say, save all that for me, just save all that. And now what do you want that old ugly stuff for? And now everybody wants Pecky. Same way he had them, in my house, there's a whole room with, it's called bird's eye cypress. It looks like it has freckles. And it was considered a flaw at the time. But up north, they had bird's eye walnut, bird's eye maple, bird's eye, all kinds of different things. And so he got the guy at the Sawyers. Y'all find any of it, I'll keep it and I'll pay you extra for it.
He was also really interested with the cypress with the really wide boards, which if you look around at some of the buildings, you see them. But my parents' house is in the living room. The boards are 4 and 5 feet wide and 20 feet long, and have the burnt edges on both edges. And he bought a whole bunch of those boards. They used to line really thick. The Breezeway building at the Driftwood had a bunch going up the stairs, and the Grill has them. And one of his sawyers gave him a call at some point. It may have been during the Depression when things weren't really going, but narrow building interior wood was in vogue. And the guy told Waldo that he didn't have the heart to cut up these 4 and 5 foot wide boards, because he thought, they'll never come again, and they haven't, and they won't. So Waldo bought truckloads of these really wide boards from them, and that's where they came from. He loved it.
But you mentioned your mother's house. John Tripson and your mother were living in Waldo's original house, and there came a need for. Tell us about that story.
My dad had been, the World War II ended, and they were living with Waldo and Elizabeth trying to get going, and Dad was milking cows for Waldo. And one night at dinner, my mother said, "Well, Daddy, I'm pregnant." And he said, if you draw up the plans, I'll build a house for you. So she drew the plans that night. And literally the next day he started building the house, which is the house I grew up in, which is right next door. And it started out as I guess 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, the kitchen. Yeah, it was a garage apartment, and then they later added the parents' master bedroom as they had more kids, and then the living room. And I remember those being added. And watching Waldo, and that was one of the things growing up that people have said to me numerous times over the years. Well, what was it like having an eccentric grandfather? And I didn't think of him as being eccentric. He was just my grandfather. He did things that other people didn't do, but we didn't. To us, it really wasn't weird. He just did what he did. He built things, and I remember going over. I remember when they were building the living room, but also when he was at his workshop, which was a barn at Mark's that eventually fell down. He looked like a kid. He had this look of just he was absorbed. His eyes were twinkling, and he was painting, and it was just, he loved what he was doing, and it was just evident. You just saw that he was just totally into creating, and it was kind of an inspiration for me as a child.
And coming into the family, when I roam around, even still today, because our yard will actually throw up things that are from, that were from the old barn. And it's fun because my grandson, he'll come, say, "Mimi, come look what I found." And it might be an old metal part of a tractor. But when you look at what Waldo did, he was absorbed in the beauty of nature with the wood and down in Miami, the big garden. And Dr. Fairchild, we still have some of the big bamboo and other Australian fans that he would go with Dr. Fairchild and collect and then come home and plant. So he was just a connoisseur of not only life but of nature and found the beauty in it.
And another story that kind of ties in with several things when you mentioned the hurricanes of 1928. When Hildy and Mark, after they bought the house, they took up the carpeting on their porch, and there were holes drilled all over, hundreds and hundreds of holes drilled through the wood, and that was so they could drain the house from the water that came from the hurricane. And the story is that when Waldo bought the property, he literally bought bought it in a rowboat. It was underwater. The Indian River Farms Drainage District was digging all the canals you see, but they hadn't opened it. So the water hadn't gone away. And he talked to Mr. Carter and he said, Waldo, buy it. He said, in 6 weeks you'll be high and dry. And so he bought that property. And when I was 8 and Randy was 6, I guess, and a neighborhood friend, Joey Hale, and Mark, we were in the ditch, one of the drainage canals there on 12th Street, and we built a little dam, and I mean, it wasn't much. It was maybe 8 inches high, or a foot if we were lucky, and there was maybe 6 inches of water on one side and 4 or 5 inches of water on the other, so we really weren't holding up much water flow. But Waldo came, and I remember looking up and seeing him, and he had khaki pants and his felt hat and no shirt, and he was raving at us that we had to tear that out immediately because we were going to screw up the whole drainage of the county and the house would be underwater. And Mark immediately jumped out of the ditch and gave us his instructions on how to take our dam out.
So Bonnie, you were the California cousin coming every few years. You know, you tell us what your impressions were of your grandparents and of your big family and.
Well, okay. We were like fish out of water. Scared to death of snakes. We were eaten alive with mosquitoes, afraid of lizards, afraid of just about everything. We grew up right outside of San Francisco. I never saw a snake until I'm still afraid of them. We died from the heat and the humidity. It was just, but we do have pleasant memories, but when we were young, there was fear at every turn. I loved hanging out by the dairy, though. I love animals, always have, and I was always enjoying, you know, watching the cows and the horses and all the barn cats and everything. The driftwood, as I got older, that was just wonderful. Many good memories of that. But hanging out at the homestead was scary for the city girl.
Because you would actually stay with Waldo and Elspeth, right?
Not Waldo.
Okay.
Very little contact with Waldo. There are some pictures of us on one of our early cross-country trips, and I'm like maybe 3, and it's the back picture. There are many pictures of us wearing cotton underwear, my brothers, my sisters, Waldo, and he was fascinated with our backs. Evidently, there's a Waldo Sexton back, and we all had it. Now, that to me is a horrible embarrassment. I can't say that when I was 5 years old, but these pictures are just floating everywhere.
But you have a memory of him.
That's okay.
You have a memory of him visiting you, he and Elspeth visiting you in California. Tell us
Yeah,
about
and when
that.
I talked to you, I didn't know where they were headed. I just found out last night from my brother Chris. They were on their way to Hawaii. And he walked in the door of our house and had a sack of silver dollars. I guess he never was without his silver dollars. And he walked into the living room, threw the sack up in the air, and just silver dollars everywhere. And my older brothers, of course, got the majority of them. I think maybe I got
The silver
10 or
dollars,
20.
yeah.
Yeah, And my sister, my younger sister, she remembers it, but she doesn't remember scurrying around trying to see who could get the most. I was told for years and years after I needed to hang on to them, my mother, hang on to these. And I believe that maybe she put them away in a safe place as I was growing up. But when I became old enough, I took a trip to one of the casinos up in Lake Tahoe. Played this dollar machine. I have nothing to show for
But the silver dollars were really thematic in his life. There's the stories about him going to buy the spoils from the Palm Beach mansions, and he would sit, at the auction and see things that weren't purchased at the end of the day. He would have a sack full of silver dollars waiting. The things that didn't sell, he was able to swoop up right away. You've got Bonnie's instance of Waldo throwing the silver dollars. Everybody who, if there's anybody who remembers Waldo Sexton Day in 1958, he reported as throwing silver dollars to the crowd. So he was, and Sean probably he was also fascinated by gold. So I'll put Sean on the spot. Sean lives on Treasure Hammock Ranch. And Sean can tell us all about the name of that and so forth.
There was a miser named Mr. Hardy, and the house where I grew up is located in Hardy Hammock. And as I understand, Bobby Chesser told me that Hardy was treasurer for the Confederacy. If it wasn't Mr. Hardy who lived in the hammock, it was a descendant, but theoretically there was Confederate coinage and gold buried there that was Mr. Hardy's fortune. And so Waldo, he knew that it was supposed to be there buried. That's where his house had been. And so he put word out. And whenever they had a Boy Scout encampment or a Farm Bureau meeting or something, everybody, or the kids anyway, would start looking for that treasure. And I've always said that I've been looking for it a post hole at a time.
Wasn't there also a story of gold associated with the driftwood that Waldo said there was something about lightning and gold? Okay.
Something about decor. We're stepping back a little bit, but when my dad built the Barbary Coast building, which replaced cottages that were set on the south side, the south line of the driftwood, he wanted to do a good job, and he hired a consultant and a designer to give him some advice about how he should decorate the building and all of that. And the fellow ran around the grill, and he ran around the patio, and he ran around what had been the driftwood without that building. And he got through, and my dad said, "Well, what do you think? What do you recommend?" And he said, "What are you guys going to do when you run out of picky cypress and wrought iron?"
Okay. There's so much more to cover. We only covered about half of what I was hoping we would cover. But as you know, it's such a great story about Waldo. What I would like to do is do a question and answer with the audience. So if I could borrow Jen's, can I borrow that? Yeah. Good. Okay, first I'd like to come to Miss Amelie Loy. I asked her, the First Lady of Vero Beach, everybody. I asked her to share a memory of Waldo.
I have a lot of special memories about Waldo. And of course, when I was a youngster and growing up here, we called him an eccentric genius. But the story I want to tell you has to do with the big piece of wood that Sean referred to. When Waldo was always bringing home something, no matter what, as the man said, he brought home a bunch of children. But nevertheless, he always found a use for it. But the big piece of wood that he spotted in St. Louis, he couldn't get it out of his mind. And he said 40 years later, he found that piece of wood. He bought it. He put it on a barge. It came down waterways. It ended up at McKee Gardens. And the reason I want to point this out is because that piece of wood was 35 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 5 inches deep. And the Hall of Giants at today's McKee Botanical Garden was built to go around that piece of wood because Waldo was going to have it for a table. That's how we got the table, and that's how we got the Hall of Giants. So that's my favorite story. Thanks for it.
It's always interesting to hear about the role of women. Did Waldo treat women as professionally competent in the business world?
The question is, did Waldo treat women as professionally competent in the business world?
Maybe everyone has, but absolutely. And welcome welcome the people that had so much to give and made them a part of his life, like Zora Neale Hurston, and many women painters at Szechuan. My feeling that I always got from Elizabeth Nana was he revered and honored women. I've never heard anything.
But this would be a good time to talk about the letters. The gifts that from Waldo keep on giving. Mark, tell us about Crosby Lumber.
Oh.
Years after Waldo died.
Yeah, he had good bookkeepers, but sometimes he'd forget to tell them things. And he died in 1967. And in 84, I'll say, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's not there anymore. It was called Crosby Lumber. It was a local lumber yard. It's off of Old Dixie, about what used to be the Healthy Selfie. You'd have to have been here a long time to know where the Healthy Selfie was. Anyway, it was down that street. And they sold it to Diamond Lumber. Well, when they were doing the title search, lo and behold, Waldo opened his land underneath the building. So no one knew it. He never got any rent out of it. The only thing I figured was when he needed lumber, he'd go down there and get it. I need so much lumber, and that was it.
And going back to Waldo's respect for women, Sean, if you would share, a lot of you might have heard about the letters that Chris just recently discovered between Waldo and the author Zora Neale Hurston, the writer of Their Eyes Were Watching God. They're very tender letters that Chris found, and Sean or Chris?
My husband was Ralph Sexton,
and he died. And after his death, I was cleaning out his desk, and in his center desk, he had nothing but calling cards, those little, tiny little calling cards that people give you. And there was one file folder, and it said Zora Neale Hurston, and then in parentheses it said colored writer. And it was a series of letters between Waldo and Zora Neale Hurston. She's most known for writing Their Eyes Were Watching God. I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the book, but it's phenomenal. There's many other books, but that's the one that I think most people know her by. Apparently in 1953, she was writing a manuscript about Waldo, Double Manny and his Pappy Two. Is that it, Sean? Double Manny and his Pappy Two. It was about guinea cows. And it was on the radio.
Double Muscle.
Muscle and his Pappy
Double
Two.
Muscle and his Pappy Two was about
Guinea cows.
Guinea cross bull, I think.
Yeah, and the right. Well, anyway, it's an 11-page manuscript, which we've yet to release. Christina's seen it. But we finally gave it to charter school, and they just finished doing a play about it, just releasing the letters. But what's so phenomenal are the letters between Waldo and Zora Neale, and what they talk about. And at one point she gets sick, and she writes them, and she says, I've been so sick, I've been to Hell's Kitchen and I've licked the spoons. And they go back and forth, and it carries on for, what, about a year, would you say? And then the last letter is a letter that he writes to the Miami Herald. And he says that his friend Zora has died, and he's submitting this manuscript to them, and if they'll take it, and if they'll send him money, he'll use it to buy her a tombstone. And I don't know if anybody knows this story, but about 10, 15 years ago, Oprah and Alice Walker, who wrote Colored Purple, they came down here to find her grave and to see if they couldn't put a headstone on it. So Waldo had wanted to do that 50 years beforehand. Of course, the Miami Herald didn't buy the manuscript still, so it still hasn't been, nobody's seen it. I think you're going to change that. So here we go.
I know we're skipping around, but there was a cow, the celebrated guinea cow. Waldo really believed in that, and Sean is a cattleman, and you know, he tries to keep his herd pretty pure. But the other day you said that you occasionally think there's some Waldo. What crops up in your herd occasionally?
Well, it's sort of like the plants that come up in Hildy's yard, you know, that were planted by, unbeknownst to everybody, exotic things. We'll have a wild offshoot of the guinea surface in our cattle, and it's not necessarily a thing you would want in production agriculture. You know, Waldo would always talk about the guinea cattle with not with production. You know, not speaking in terms of carcass weight and ribeye area and marbling, but more like this noble little cow, you know, that would hold her head high and proud.
And we have one more question.
Can you tell us any stories or a little bit about Waldo's Mountain?
Yes, thank you. Waldo's Mountain, Sean. That's one.
Oh, you want to hear a little bit about it?
Yes.
I was told that there were, what was the name of the dredge? They were doing the Vero Isles, the fingers. No, but this is on the other side. The same dredge that had created the fingers for Forrest Graves was running around in the river, and Waldo took that guy to dinner at the Ocean Grill one night and said, I want you to come over to my property over there around Bethel Creek, and I need some extra dirt to fill some of my lots on the beach. And I figure you could probably, you know, since I'm taking you to dinner at such a nice place, I'm so charming, maybe you could pile a little dirt over there, dredge it up from the bottom, and make a deeper draft for the boats and make things come out good over there. And Bill Alexander told me that the fellow had been charmed by Waldo, but he also was sort of seeing through the whole thing. And he decided he would get a rise out of him. Apparently it's not a big thing to keep the dredge going a while. And he put a pile there as tall as the trees that it was stacked between. And Waldo, he really did get a rise out of him. He arrived and he saw it. He thought, I think he first thought, my God, what am I going to do with all that dirt? And then something happened, and I think it took a little while, but he said, it's a mountain, it's a mountain. Of course.
It was the highest point of land between Key West and Kitty Hawk, North Carolina.
But just because running out of time, but tell us what became of Waldo.
The mountain wound up where all mountains wind up, in the sea. There was a northeaster getting ready to clean the ocean grill and the driftwood off of the map, and we had to get some dirt there. All of the trucks were running, all the mines on the west side of the river were at capacity. There was no room on the road for trucks hauling fill to save beachside buildings. And Dick Bird, who was a fill contractor, said to my dad, why don't we go get that old mound? And we realized we had a perfect supply of dirt right there, of sand, and that was the easiest solution and the surest thing that we could have done. And it basically, the mountain saved the grill and the driftwood.
And Sean wrote a book about it. It's almost like a Russian novel. It's like sacrificing one thing you love for something else. And it's out there, and it's also got some really good biographical information on Waldo. And I think we didn't even get to the ghost. I'll just give a quick yes or no, if you guys would pass it around on whether you believe in the ghost stories involving Waldo.
Well, actually, I can tell you that on December 23rd, we had 15 Ghostbusters at our house. December 23rd of last year, 2017. They were there from 7:30 at night until 1:30 in the morning, and they contacted Grandma Louisa. Well, actually, she contacted them. There was someone else that was there, and at the very end, there was Waldo. So there's going to be a report published on that. They're finishing that up. So for us personally in the house, we grew to love them, but we have spirits in our house. And we thought probably Waldo was one of the first ones that things would happen. So from this girl, the answer is yes.
Okay. I think the answer is yes from what, I don't know. What's your answer? Yes or no?
About ghosts?
Ghosts, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's ghosts. There's something. And I'll tell you what, one night in our Hilda and I's bedroom, there's a great big door. And to turn the light on, you gotta have to be on the other side of the door. And all of a sudden that light came on. And it's about 2 in the morning. And I'm thinking, I got that door locked, but I don't know what's out there. So I'll be real brave, and I got a little footstool and climbed up there and unscrewed the light bulb and went back to bed. But in the morning, lo and behold, the switch was not on. I screwed the light bulb back in and it worked. So somebody was out there. I had a friend of mine come right after we bought the house in Latin America, and his wife stormed downstairs one morning why didn't you tell me there were ghosts in this house? And what am I going to say? Hate to scare a guest.
The summer after I graduated from high school, the year after, I was building furniture, and I was actually using Waldo's wood shop, his creativity shop, and numerous times I felt like somebody was watching me, and it was pretty open around. I mean, there was foliage, but I could never see anybody. I just felt a presence. So I've always been convinced that yeah, he's there.
I'll tell you another quick funny story. When we moved into the house, our son was 4, and he had never seen a picture of Waldo, and so he came down one morning, and it was always the same question: how are you? What would you like for breakfast? And one morning we were sitting there having our coffee, and he said, a man was in my room last night. And you know, Mark and I looked at each other and said, really? And he said, yes. And I said to him, what did he say? And he said, well, I woke up, and he said, there was a man sitting at the end of my bed. And I said, who are you? And he said, I'm Waldo. Who are you? And he said, well, I'm Rob, and you're in my bedroom. And so we went and found a picture. And I showed Rob. I said, these are some pictures, and he pointed him out right away. He said, you know, that's the man that was there. Another funny story about the house.
I got it.
Real quick. Things would happen. I mean, it was unbelievable the things that would happen. And so when we first moved in there, cocktail time at the Sextons and the Tripson was a really, it was a very important time. But, we would always have cocktails, and I noticed that I was having way too many. And it was just being able to go to sleep at night. So one night I was there all by myself, and I walked around, and I just said, Waldo, I have to stop drinking this much. So I just want you to know that we are not changing one single thing. Everything, we're just going to clean it up, and everything will stay the same. And everything just stopped. So everything was good.
Jens, if we've already, Bonnie.
I did stay in the house a couple of summers with my grandmother when I was in high school. Waldo, he was still alive, but I believe he was in the nursing home at that time, and there just wasn't, there wasn't much going on with him. Like I said, I was always finding snakes in the house, and the cover, like that. I will say though, when my husband and I were waiting to move into a house, we had about, I don't know, maybe a month or so before we could move in, and we did stay in Nana's house, and it was October. Nana always visited my mom in California in October, because the weather was good out there that time of year. And I will say that I heard weird noises. I understand, I can remember some lights flickering, things like that, but I never saw anything, and I just wasn't even thinking ghosts or anything like that. So I don't know. I personally have never seen anything, but yeah, there were some strange noises, and I'd say, well, the house is like 100 years old. And
Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay, I'm just not a ghost person, really. And I do, however, there are those who have gone before us who are gone, and I think they manifest in spirits. And I've been visited by many people who I knew and loved and had a relationship with, who have come to me in my dreams, that sort of thing. So that's what I do with ghosts. I'm not real big on the other thing.
Randy.
I'm in Sean's school in this, I think. We live down in Tiger Hammock, which is an Indian village, so there's a lot of spirits around us down there supposedly, but I've never been contacted by them, but that's me. I'm too busy working to really think about it.
You don't go to sleep at night, you're up all.
Well, we talked about everything, a lot of things about Waldo, which we talked about everything. There's a lot more to cover. One of the quick things is that Mark and Hildy and their daughter Charlotte, they opened the homestead up, and they do weddings and so forth at the original homestead. That was one of the interesting things, that there's still kind of entrepreneurial things that the Sexton family's coming with. But it's, you know, we went from that, talked about everything from Waldo's growing up to the ghost and everything. But there's one thing that let us all of you are here tonight for, that you have some type of connection to Waldo Sexton. And to that, I would only say that let the spirit of Waldo Sexton always live in Vero Beach. Thank you all very much for coming. Don't forget to get your free one-year subscription to Indian River Magazine. Pick up a card on the way out, and there's lots of magazines. If you haven't read our magazine yet, please go pick up
Greg,
more.
before everybody goes, Waldo said the only regret he had in life is he didn't come to Florida sooner.